welcome. First question, can you hear me? That's a mumble's yes. Well, welcome to this talk, which is based on a walk for Lymington Town Tours, and it's their Courts and Alleyways talk, which basically means you start at St Thomas's Church, walk down the north side of the High Street to the Catholic Church, cross over, walk up to Moore and Barlow, and then you can say, now we can have a cup of tea. The only thing I'd like to point out to you before we actually start is the courts and alleyways, a lot of them are private. So if after this talk you think, I'm going to go and make sure she said it right, just bear in mind, it could be private. Yes, you can go in there, but behave yourselves. Okay, I want to begin by giving you a very, very brief history of Lymington. And we're going to start with good old William the Conqueror, 1066. He came, he conquered, and he wanted to give his friends who helped him a reward. And so he gave to the Earls of Shaftesbury a whole tract of land along the south coast, right up and including the Isle of Wight. Now everything was going quite nicely until William decided he wanted to know what he's got. And so we have the famous Domesday Book. And in that it tells us that in Lymington there was two settlements. One was by the church, and that was a farming settlement, very few people. And the other was down by the quay, and they were fishermen. Now we carry on quite happily until 1100. And that's when William II dies. And there's a bit of an altercation between his eldest brother Robert and Henry, who's the next surviving brother down. As you might know, Henry won. Unfortunately, the Earls of Shaftesbury backed Robert. And Henry didn't like this, so he took all the land away from him, and gave it to the Earls of Exeter, and that was the de Redford family. If you've ever been to Christchurch, and I expect you all have, you might have seen the castle, or the remains of the castle. That was one of the homes of the de Redford family. And if you've got the Isle of Wight as your property as well, you might want to visit. Now, I'm no sailor, but I understand that the crossing between Christchurch and the Isle of Wight is very dangerous. And the only safe passage from the west is from Lymington to Yarmouth. So you can see the de Redfords coming to Lymington quite often. So when it got to about 1200, the family decided they would like to get some money from this land. So why not build a town? A town that will be available for people in the outside communities to come in and trade, that will bring money in. And that's what they did. And they did it in the format of a Norman new town. And that, if you're wondering, is what this map is. It's the format of Lymington. And it's based on the Norman new town, which is a very, very wide high street. And going off to the sides of it, you've got these long, narrow plots called burgage plots. Now they're 110 yards long, and they're a rod pole and perch wide, which you all know is 16.5 feet, which works out to be 1/8 of an acre. Now these burgage plots were rented out at 6p a year. And if you rented one, you were a burgess. And it meant that you were responsible for protecting your property and the rest of the town. The de Redfords, they were quite happy to rent it, but they weren't going to protect you. So that was down to you. And what it meant was at the front of these plots, by the high street, that's where you'd have your business premises. And then behind that, you'd have your domestic premises, and behind that, you might have a yard where you keep chickens, probably a pig as your disposal unit, and maybe a few crops. Now, if you were a sound gardener, you wanted some more land, you could then enter into a lottery once a year for a bit more land, which is where the bar fields come into. And you could use that for the year. But next year, you'd go into the lottery again, and you might not get the same piece of land. So that's the basic format of how we got Lymington. The idea of the very, very wide high street was so that we could have fairs, trade fairs, not fun fairs, okay, to bring the people in. But here's a picture of one of the high streets, a bit later on. I want you to think of it, use your imagination. This high street is made of mud. It's not tarmac. We didn't have tarmac until the 1900s. It wasn't paved, that wasn't till 1914. It was basically made of mud. And if we had, you might talk about potholes nowadays, well, imagine what the mud did. To repair them, they basically would plough it all up, put in faggots, plough it up again and put some more mud on. And periodically you'd have stepping stones, just in case of wet weather, to keep your feet. I was going to say clean, that was not quite right. So here's a more colourful one of the high street, and it gives you an idea of what it was like. Now we're going to start our walk, okay? We're going to come from St Thomas's, we're going to go down to Scott Bailey, and the first thing we see is one of these, which if you can't see is a boot scraper. And the idea is, if you've been walking around on this mud, you don't really want people coming in and bringing it into your house. So they'd have quite a lot of these outside and you'd scrape your feet. If you go and see this and then carry on walking up towards a sort of gateway, you'll come across this, which is a pump. Because believe it or not, we didn't have running water. All Lymington had was wells. Now this pump is by a building, so it's obviously been moved. You wouldn't have a pump by a building. But we had over 600 wells in Lymington, and at least a third of them were polluted. Nothing changes. Nothing changes, yeah. So we did have a very, I'm going to say, forward-thinking MP. I might point out that before the Great Reform Act, we used to send 2 MPs to Parliament, and that was who had the pocket would send the MPs. But this one said, there's a lot of sickness around, the towns are growing, we haven't got sanitation, we haven't got running water, we need to do something about it. And he and some of the other MPs got together and they came up with this Act of Health. This was in the late 1840s. The only problem was it wasn't compulsory. And all it said was that towns could raise a levy to put in running water and a sewerage system. Now nothing changes, because what did the Lymingtonians say? We're not paying for it. And what's more, no government are going to tell us we're going to get healthy. So what happened? Nothing. A few years later, there was outbreaks of cholera and sickness, diarrhoea, and so the town council got a letter from the Board of Health saying, you've got to do something about it. And once again, they weren't very quick to move, but thought, oh, we'll do something, okay. We'll form a board, okay. Well, 9 years later, they still hadn't met, but they formed a board, and then things got really bad, and they thought, well, we must do something, all reluctantly. But the people didn't like it. And some wag sent to the local paper this quote: "People who don't like smells must hold their noses. If health suffers, send for a doctor and take physic. If all nuisances were abolished, there would be no doctors and people would live too long. It's absurd to be too particular in these matters. Local boards are no good." So you get the flavour of what was going on. But eventually, if I say to you, we did have running water in the late 1890s, and we had a sewerage system laying down in the late 1880s to 1914. So we get there in the end. However, now let's get personal, because there's something we do every day, all of us, and that's go to the bathroom. Now, what do you do if you've got no sewer, no running water? Well, what you'd have is probably an earth closet in your garden, which you would bury it. But if it was like we've had in June, July, this lovely wet weather, or in the winter when it's absolutely cold and you're really busting at night, what do you do? Well, if you're like me, you would have a gazunder. If you're posh, you would have a potty. But whatever it is, you have to empty it in the morning. Now, I want you to bear that in mind because it's quite important for later on. Okay? Do you all know what a gazunder is? Gazunder is a potty that goes under the bed. Right, we're now going to go for a little walk down the high street. We're going to come to this place which is Rashley Mews. And it's called Rashley Mews because it used to be, for about 150 years, a builder's yard for Rashley and Co. Now this company still exists, and it exists in Pennington in South Street. It was a very, I'm going to say big company. It certainly employed over 100 men, and it built some very prestigious buildings. It actually built the Victoria Hotel in Milford, now demolished. It also did repair works for St Thomas's, and it built the Catholic school, the one where the Catholic Church is now. And later on, it also built the superstructures of some of the boats. So quite a prestigious company. And that's where it gets its name. It's also where the post office is now. But if you then go further back, behind the post office, before you get to the car park, you come to one of these, which is one of our famous curvy, wavy, serpentine walls. Now there are at least 6 of these in Lymington, and to start with, spoiler alert. There's an urban myth that these were built by French prisoners of war. They weren't. And the reason why they weren't is that we never had any French prisoners of war. The nearest French prisoners of war we had were at Porchester. Now forgive me, that's a long way to march a group of men to build a wall. Also, if you've looked at these walls, you will see they're actually very well made. It's craftsmanship. Now most of the ordinary soldiers are not expert bricklayers. And if you don't believe me, go down Church Lane and have a look at a wall that was built by an amateur bricklayer and compare it to one of these. And you know that this is actually a work of art. Now, although it's longer than a straight wall, it's actually cheaper to build because these walls are only 1 brick thick. And it gets its strength from the curve, like you would with an arch. If you want to build a straight wall, you need 2 lots of bricks side by side with buttresses or quoins to give them its strength. So in fact, although the straight wall is shorter, it takes more bricks than one of these. And also these They come in very handy if you're a gardener, because they were built around about 1800, and because they're 1 brick thick, the sun warms them up very quickly. And at that time we were sending round plant hunters around the world who were coming back with these tender young plants. And if you then put them in the curve of the wall, they were more protective than any straight wall. So it had its uses. And so we got 6 of those. 3 of them are around Church Lane, and I defy you to find the 3rd one. Right, now we're coming out and we're going down. Now this is a bit of history, okay? Thank you. Because Halifax is there, but it's not there now. Okay, it's gone. And we're looking at basically the one on the right-hand side, because it used to be a pub. And we had lots of pubs in Lymington. Not surprising, because, as you've all remembered, we can't really drink the water. The water is polluted. So we drink beer. Now, some of you know I'm a Beaver Scout leader, and I quite often take the beavers on one of these walks. And you say to them, did you know that you had to drink beer? And the reaction was, yeah! And then he said, small beer, very weak. And then you ask them, well, why did you drink beer? Precisely, silence. He says, well, you can't drink the water, but you could get it from the shop. No, you can't. So, I say we had lots and lots of pubs. But they made their own beer. But let's be honest, there are some sharp people around, and, you know, they might like to try and pull a fast one. To solve that, we have once a year to elect at the mayoral court one of the burgesses who is an ale taster or an ale conner. Now, when you say this to the groups you're taking around, most of them said, oh, I like that job. Yes, well, it wasn't just a case of tasting the ale. You also had to make sure the bread was okay, that the weights and measures were okay, that the right tax was okay. And, just to throw a spanner in the work, you didn't go and get a pint and taste it and go, yes, I think this one's all right, tax is fine. No, you had a special uniform. And your uniform was a lovely pair of leather breeches. And you go in, you get your ale, and you pour it on the seat, and you would sit in it for half an hour. Now, I'm not sure what they did in that half an hour, but they'd obviously passed the time. Then they get up and they go, yeah, that's nice and sticky, so it must be very strong. Because it meant there's more sugar in it. And so then they were able to come up with the fact that the beer was being charged at the right amount, or not, as the case may be. Next question is, how many of you still want to be ale tasters? Not many. But surprisingly, not everybody wanted to do it. Because apparently in 1641, one of the burgesses who was actually elected to do it refused. And he was fined 40 shillings for refusing to take the... This is in 1681. Heck of a lot of money. So you're not alone. Right, we're now going to hop over to the other side of what was Halifax. And now we come back to, I'm sorry to bring it up again, but bathrooms, okay? Right, we've now got running water. What do you want to do? You want it inside your house. How about having an ensuite? Oh, hang on. You remember those burgage plots? 16 and a half feet wide, 110 yards long. Where on earth are you going to put a bathroom? Lymingtonians, along with a few other people, came up with this bright idea: we'll have a hanging loo. We'll stick it on the side, and that is what that is. Whoops. There. Okay, that's a hanging loo. Again, one of my beavers said, well, how do you get in there? Yeah, from the inside. So that's what they did. If they couldn't have it inside, they'd stick it on the outside. And there are lots of hanging loos in Lymington, if you know where to look. And that is the first that you come on this walk. Now we're going down to the Angel. Now the Angel is, or was, one of our coaching inns. And I don't know if you can see this, but one of the things that you can actually recognise a coaching inn is with these black boulders that you get on the side of the buildings. Now people often wonder what they're doing there. They're there to protect the wall, obviously, but also to protect the wheels of the wagons as they go through. And I would point out that people were asked to get off at the top of the wagons before they went under the bridge. Okay, so here we go. There's the pub, probably built about 1630. And if you're a coaching inn and you've suddenly got running water and you've got guests staying, they might like a bathroom too. So you come up with this hanging loos at the top here. And there's two there. They're the ones that got slate on top. And until 2010, there was a third one. Now I used to walk under that and think to myself, I wouldn't use that. It's likely to fall down. And when they did some repair, they actually took it down. So they had 3 hanging loos there. Going further into the Angel, this is something I personally find quite fascinating. These are the buildings that are on the right-hand side. And if you had a picture taken way back in the 1770s, those buildings will be exactly the same roof line. They are the same buildings. So it's like going back in history. All right, they've been upgraded and they're used for other purposes. There used to be places for the horses to be stabled, where the food was, hay, and they had 50 horses were able to be stabled there. And you know where the car park is at Tesco's? That's where the field was where they used to turn the horses out so they could have a graze. That part of the Angel courtyard, this is frightening now, used to have 1 pump. Just 1 pump for all those horses, for all those work people, and for the people that stayed there. Imagine you were the poor soul that had to get up and get the water in. You'd probably be there all day. And a true story this is, if you carry on down the end there until you come to, I think it's now a Now's place, on the top, on the wall, there is, I'm going to say a plaque, and it says J.H. 1773. J.H. was John Hunniford, and he was the landlord of the Angel at the time. And he was somebody who was into everything, and yes, including smuggling. But before you all start cringing, if you were alive then, you'd be involved in smuggling, because everybody was. If you weren't a smuggler, you were actually supporting them. You might be getting your goods off of them. You might be hiding them. They probably were a relative. Everybody was involved, even the vicar. In fact, the church was used as a lookout post. Because if you go up in the bell tower of St Thomas's and look out over the Solent, you've got a lovely view. And you can see the smugglers coming in. So you know that your product will be coming in. And if you get down to the shore at the same time as the smuggler, you've got it cheaper. So everybody was involved. But the true story about that plaque is, a few years ago, they were doing some renovations. And the guy that was doing this plaque, painting it in, changed the date. Made it 1775, I think it was. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, Lymington Town Tours guides are quite observant. And we made quite a furore about this. And eventually, we've got it put back to 1773. So, one up to us. If you can't make this one out, it's early court. Okay? Early court, still going down the hill, was where our fourth town hall was. And there it is, the pretty one in the middle. The land was given by Mrs. Martha Early, and it was about 1913. I think it's because she didn't like the idea of the councillors actually meeting in the Angel. The previous 3 town halls we had, they were actually in the high street, on the road in the high street. So nowadays they would be a real bottleneck. And they were very important buildings because that was where, if we were attacked, the alarm bell would go off. That's where you find your bow and arrows and your pikes. Outside you find the ducking stool, the pillory and the stocks. That's where announcements were made. Very important building. One of the things I like about Lymingtonians is that they are very good at recycling. The third one was actually built on pillars or stilts. And when that was taken down, the pillars were bought by George Ingman. And if the name doesn't mean anything to you, he was the boat builder that actually started where Bertham's is now. And he was the builder that built the first yachts in Lymington to actually make sailing a hobby. And there were 3 of them, the Lulworth, the Alarm, and the Arrow. And one of them actually beat the America in the America's Cup before it was the America's Cup. However, very important family in Lymington, very rich at one stage, but it was one of those families that went from clogs to clogs in 3 generations. And the 3rd generation got this great big house built called South Hayes, and they used the pillars from the town hall in that building. That's now gone, and so we don't want to waste anything. So if you want to see these pillars now that used to be our 3rd town hall, or part of, come to Woodside Gardens, go to the Rose Garden, and those pillars used to be part of our town hall. This was up until the 60s when our next town hall, the one in Avenue Road, was built. And now it's just shops. Oh, I love this one. You take a group of people down and you stand them in front of a brick wall, and they look at you as though you're mad. Now this is Cannon Court, and this brick wall, you might not be able to work it out, but it's actually been bricked up. But it used to be a baker's. And one of the things about bakers is that their ovens had to go 24/7. It's no good saying, oh, it's Saturday, we've got Sunday off, we shut the ovens down, because come Monday, you've got to start the whole thing up again, and you'll be wasting time. But we make good use of these ovens. And so on a Sunday, when you're on your way to church, you brought your meat, and you went to the baker's, and you used his oven to cook your meat. You hoped and prayed the vicar wouldn't go on, so that you come out and then you collect your meat. Now I'm sure the baker charged you for that little service, but this is one of the places in Lymington where it actually happened. Now we're going to go down to the Catholic Church. These gates are all that you'd know there was a church behind them. And there's a reason for that. We didn't like Catholics. They were heathens. And so they put the gates up to protect them. Both sides of the gates you've got houses. And to get to the church you've actually got to walk in, go past the houses. On the left-hand side you've got the church, and on the right-hand side you've actually got the school, which was built by Rashleys, come on. But those gates were there to protect. That's what it looks like inside. The one on the left is the church, and the one on the right is the school. Just use your imagination. You are the parish priest. You've got a very, very big parish. You've got the whole of the New Forest. To get to your parishioners, you'd either walk. If you were really rich, you might have a horse. But we know of one priest that actually went on a penny farthing. Now to go out, you'd be all dressed in your clerical garb. You were a sitting target because everybody knew you were the parish priest. And so you're going out on the forest and you're likely to be set about. So, one priest had a great idea. He's going to appeal to Rome that he could go out into his parish without his clerical garb. Eventually, he got an answer from Rome, and the answer was, no way. You're a priest, you wear your garb. But as a special concession, you can raise your hem 18 inches for when you ride your bike. And I'd like to add, and also so you can run faster, but that wasn't in the official. And that was told to us by the official historian of the Catholic Church. Now the church itself was actually designed by Joseph Hanson, who you might know of Hanson Cabs, and he also was the architect for Arundel Cathedral. And that church today is about the oldest Catholic parish church in Hampshire, Dorset, that is still in use, and quite well in use, I understand. Right, we're now going to cross the road and we're going to go to the Somic Hall. Forget that. It used to be a pub before that was built. Another pub. So we could have some more beer being made. And the owner, or rather the landlord, was Mr. Thring. And he was into lots of other things as well. He was a bill poster, a town crier, and he was an amateur inoculator. Now, you remember COVID, don't you? Yeah? You know what inoculator is? Well, okay. This was in early 1800s. Lymington was not a very healthy place to live in. We had outbreaks of cholera quite often. We even had the plague at one stage, and also we had smallpox. And in the 1770s and 1780s, we had two major outbreaks of smallpox. And the church wardens in 1791 were persuaded to hold a general vaccination. It wasn't exactly enthusiastic, but they got it through the meeting. And so they actually had 1,100 people to be inoculated. And they had 3 doctors. Mr. Barclay, he did 300, of whom 2 died. Mr. Donald, he did 500, and no one died. And Mr. Knightley, he did 300, of whom 18 died, so choose your doctor wisely. So of the 20 who died as a result of the inoculation, there was only 7 that actually died of smallpox naturally. So it actually shows 2 things actually. It shows that the people cared about the health really, even if the people themselves didn't. But also, they were ahead of their time because this was 1791 and the guy that came up with the smallpox injection wasn't until 1796. So we were actually ahead of him. Now, I said it wasn't a particularly healthy place to live, but we did have a hospital. It was in Gospel Street, and it was called the Dog Kennel. Eventually, it became an isolation hospital for smallpox and cholera and things like that. And eventually, we actually got our own cottage hospital. Other than that, if you were ill, you could go to the barber's and be bled and have your teeth taken out. Otherwise, I think you could die, really. Right, going up the hill now. I love this alleyway. You could walk straight past it and not know it was there. It's very narrow, and if you look at the floor, it's got car entry. And you look at it and you think, I wouldn't like to drive my car up there. And on the wall, it's got rubber matting to prevent the scratches. But as I like you, I'm going to tell you 3 things about this little alleyway. Number 1, that, yes, it's a hanging loo. Okay? Stuck between 2 buildings. Another one. That's to prove a car does get up there. And there's a modern building behind it. Now, I'm sure some, or most of you, I hope, would know that we did have a very popular writer that lived in Lymington called Dennis Wheatley. Yes, good, some of you do. He lived in Grove Gardens. And when he sold up and the builders moved in, some of his furnishings, that's right, were actually bought up. And the front door, not the bit around it, but the actual door itself is one of the doors from Dennis Wheatley's house. And he's got 5 others inside there as well. So there we go, recycling again. And the other thing is, if you ever get bored, now I know you wouldn't, but if you ever get bored and you want to play a little game, go down that alleyway, it's not very long, and on the left-hand side is a lovely brick wall. And there's a game you can play. Because we had loads and loads of brickworks around here, because we have got no natural stone, everything was brick. And you can look at that wall and you could actually pick out pairs of bricks that came out of the same mould. And it's the only place I've noticed it, but there you can actually see that they were handmade bricks. And that little alleyway there is where we've just been. So you've probably walked past it many times and not even noticed it. Now this is the buttery, what was, and it used to be a butcher's, Mr. Tops the butcher's. And I don't know whether you are aware of this, but up to 1761, I think it was, you were actually allowed, if you were a butcher, to slaughter your animals in the high street. Do you remember what it was made of, that high street?
Mud.
Mud, yeah. Do you know it's actually on a hill? Imagine what happens when it rains.
So the ice cream parlour wouldn't be very nice then?
It's not very nice, it wasn't. So they actually changed the rules. And Mr. Topboys and somebody that took over actually come up with this bright idea. I've got this yard behind me, I'm going to make it into an abattoir. And that's what he did. And if you look there, you've actually got hooks. And those were hooks where the meat used to be hung up, apparently. So the animals would come in, go down the end, walk in, and they'd come back on a cart. Now, on that side, you would have, or still is, cottages. On the other side is now a bank, but at one time there was another 5 cottages. You know how quick Lymingtonians are to absorb all this good health, etc.? Apparently in 1948 they still had 1 outside tap and 1 outside loo in that courtyard. They've caught up with it now if you're thinking of buying properties down there, okay? But it still makes you think, doesn't it? Thank you. That's what it looks like now. Okay, so you've got some lovely cottages on the left-hand side. Still going up the hill, we now come to Ashley Lane. Now this is like the crossroads of New Street and Ashley Lane. And in the 1600s, there was a man called Ashley that lived in the corner house at the top here. And he was a rope maker. And this is one of our rope walks. A nice straight rope. If you know how to make ropes, it's basically you're twisting the material and pulling backwards. If you want to see it in action, go to Chatham Dockyards. But Mr. Ashley's ropes were for 2 things. One was for the church bells, and the other one was for bull baiting. Because the bull baiting took place in Grove Gardens behind this. If you want to know more details, I'll tell you privately. And now we come to Moore and Barlow. This house shouts money. It was built in the 1790s, I think it was, by the people from Piewell. Now, what I find amusing about this is Piewell was their country house. This was their townhouse. Now, you could walk it. But no, they had money and they wanted a house in town. When you look at the front of it, the bricks are all end bricks. Not the long way, the short bit. And they're built that way on. Just imagine how many bricks that would have taken. And, not surprisingly, it's only on the front. The rest of it is Flemish bond. But it shouts money. As you can see, it's actually got pavement. None of this coming off that rotten road, with all that mud. You can actually go up, get yourself sorted out, and on top of that, there's stairs going up. Well, if it should get very heavy rain and the water comes in, it's not going to go in your front door, is it? Can't really see it from that, but they've actually got 2 boot scrapers. Yeah. That house is 4 burgage plots wide. It was built by the Weld family, and we know down the time the St Barb's had it. It was a girls' school, it was a doctor's, and now it's a solicitor. Underneath you've got the original cellars, and they're now used as storage, I understand. To that side, sorry, my left and right's going berserk. There is like a office block, and that wasn't there originally. That was your entrance into the garden. But in the front, you've got a lovely set of railings. Now, they're not the original. The original went during the war, but they've replaced them. And one of the other things you've got there is above the gate is room for a light. Now, we didn't have light, not street lighting, until 1832. And then it was gas lighting. And that was for quite a while. And then we caught up with this newfangled electricity. But not for long. We then went back to gas. And rumour has it it's because the councillors had more shares in the gas company than the electricity company. But if you want to see the original gas lamp, go down to the Royal Yacht Club, and there's one of our original gas lights, which was, first of all, outside St Thomas's Church. That's your lot. So I've now taken you from 1066 to 2024. I don't know what you feel like when you walk up the high street. I know so often I sort of think to myself, oh, the rubbish, the noise. And I look at my notes and I think, aren't we blessed? We've actually got pavement. We've actually got tarmac. We've got street lighting. We've got proper shops. And we've got a bit of security. And you think how far we've come. And I praise God for that. I hope you've learnt something. I have brought some leaflets, the Lymington town tours, if you want to know about their walks. Sorry church, they're on Sundays, 11 o'clock, and they're for an hour and a half and they cost £5. But if you want a leaflet, please come.